I see that we have a quorum, so I'm going to call this meeting of Policy and Priorities Committee for June 16th to order. First item of business is to adopt the agenda. It has been moved by Councillor Durley and seconded by Councillor King that the agenda for June 16, 2014, regular meeting of Policy and Priorities Committee be adopted. Any changes? Call the question. All in favor? And that is carried. Disclosure of pecuniary interest and the general nature thereof. If anyone has any pecuniary interest in any of the items we're going to discuss, I see none. Excuse me, just a moment of admin work here. See none, so we'll note that there is no pecuniary interest declared by anyone on committee in this meeting. Moving on then, under new business, 5.1, healthcare spending account recommendation. It has been moved by Councillor King, seconded by Councillor Durley, that the issue summary report regarding the healthcare spending account recommendation be received for information, and that the healthcare spending account financial implications be brought forward to the 2015 budget deliberation for committee's consideration. We have a report, I believe, that our treasurer is going to explain to us.
Through you, Mr. Chair, as part of the process of staff engagement over the last year, and as part of some of the reports that have been brought forward to council, we were looking at different and innovative ways to increase some of the incentives at a minimal cost to the organization. One of these methods was to look at a health care spending account or flex benefits. So we've had several meetings throughout the year to try and determine what would be the best package that would be available to be offered to staff, and something that kind of put it into their hands and allowed them to have it be their choice. So right now, under the core benefit package, what we have is several different facets that are available: dental, extended health care benefits, and so forth, and then professional services like massage therapy and such. So recommendations from staff were coming in at what they wanted to be increased. However, you can't increase it for one staff, you have to increase it for the whole organization. So the costs of doing that were significant in providing some sort of change for the staff members. So what we did was we brought in our existing consultants that we have with Mosey and Mosey, and sat down with them and discussed what are several different options of a healthcare spending account or flex benefits. This healthcare spending account came out to be the most feasible and something that's affordable for the town, because it allowed us to set up essentially a healthcare spending account for each full-time permanent staff member that could be utilized as a different type of benefit was not available to them. So for instance, if they had to have dental care that was in excess of our core benefit package, they could submit this through their healthcare spending account and get that portion reimbursed. If, for instance, they were on vitamins that were for maternity, pregnancies or whatever, those things were not covered under our current core package, but they were now accessible under the healthcare spending account. So it allowed a greater opportunity for them as well, accessing benefits that we don't cover under our core package and wouldn't cover unless we made significant changes to it. So some of the things that we discussed is, okay, so how does that healthcare spending account look if after 1 year they don't use it? So we got the recommendation from the organization that you would carry it over for 1 year only. After a 24-month period, the first years would be lost, so that it would be returned back to the town on that basis. So it's just something to look at for budget considerations, providing a lot more flexibility for the employees. It kind of puts the engagements in their hands to use it, and it's really the lowest cost implication to the town going forward.
Thank you. There may be questions. Councillor King? Councillor King. Councillor Lane? And then Councillor Pappas.
Yes, through you, Mr. Chair. Could you tell me, in the municipalities, of the region, how many have a spending account as a benefit?
Thank you.
There's none.
Do you have a follow-up,
Thank you very much.
Councilor Pat?
Yes, through you, Mr. Chair. Madam Treasurer, just how did they establish the $500? Is that based on usage, or what is
It was taken into consideration what would a flex benefit account look like, or what would another, adding the core package increases there, and then saying, you know, affordability-wise, what we could afford. The $500 was something that, when talking with the consultants, they recommended as a, for keeping the core package the same. This is something that, you know, they have enough there if there's, you know, crowns or, what do they call it? But those things that we only cover about 50% on dental, this would help to cover off the rest of that. It could be potentially, if they save it for 2 years, you could have laser eye surgery, and a portion of that could be used for that. So that was the method of coming up with the $500, that there would be enough to facilitate the benefits for items that would be in excess of what they're currently using.
Thank you, Madam Treasurer. Councilor Pat?
just quick, I'm fascinated by this because I just heard about this at another entity, about them going this route. Now, just out of curiosity, and we'll have more time, so if I don't use it up to $500 the first year, do I get $1,000 next year, the following year? Is that the idea?
Yes, you would.
Yeah, so that if I had any excess of those that are above the core package level, right, that I could utilize those funds to offset any sort of increases over and above that. Okay, that's good. I'm glad. Okay.
Thank you. Mr. Mayor, I think you have some
Thank you,
questions.
Mr. Chair. I heard about this type of package maybe 6-7 years ago, and we're talking about it at the region. So I understand this isn't new. I presume that this is something that the Green Shield does, which is our provider. Can we just hear a little bit more about that? You know, what type of employer has this already? Just a little bit more about this type of package.
Okay, it's through you, Mr. Chair. This is not new. A healthcare spending account is a little bit different than flex benefits. Flex benefits allows you to have your staff select the type of benefits they want more of. However, it can become very costly. The costs are out of our hands, and there's a liability there for the municipalities. Under this program, we know the amount. That amount will never change unless it gets increased at budget, because, you know, the cost of benefits goes, you know, in future years. But, you know, right now we know that it's going to cost us roughly $28,000, I suggested. That number doesn't change year over year. That stays exactly the same. So there's limited risk there, as you know, the benefit provider would be able to tell you as well, because it either reverts back to the town or they use it, but it never increases. Under our core benefit package, that even without flex benefits, the more use generates a higher cost to us. So we need to, this is a way to control any additional risk to us as an organization. They had indicated to me that the consultants, that there's no local municipality that they know of that is using this tool right now. A lot are using the flex benefits, but there are organizations, private and public, that are using this in other facets, and they mentioned things like you know, the bigger box hydros and so forth, companies using the flex benefits type module, and how it can become quite excessively expensive. And so we just went back to this, we kept returning back to this healthcare spending account as an option that would allow us to reduce our liability, but still give incentives to the staff.
Okay, thank you. So there aren't any local municipalities, are there, in Ontario, or that we're aware of, Mr. Chair?
Madam Treasurer?
I know that there is some in Ontario. Green Shield does do the administration for this. This is something they're very familiar with. So, and we were, again, we were looking at, would we administer this ourselves or go through Green Shield? Green Shield is familiar with all of the benefits that are available, are the drugs and medicines that you can claim. So it's easier to use Green Shield as the administrator of a healthcare spending account, for instance, because a DIN number has to be associated with that type of benefit, and those benefits may not be offered under our current plan, but they will be offered under here. So they follow all the legislation of Revenue Canada, because nothing can be seen as a taxable benefit for this, and they make sure that that is met. So that's why Green Shield is a great fit for us. We're already currently using them for our benefits. So I don't have the names of companies that are using this. I could provide names from the consultants that we dealt with on this. Flex Benefits is something that is being used heavily out in the private sector world and some of the bigger box public sector worlds. Locally, we would be the first to take on something like this.
Okay, thank you. It might be helpful, Mr. Chair, to get those names in case we're asked of those other municipalities in Ontario that may be using this. The final question, Mr. Chair, is, and I think there's some of this in the report, so I just want to hear from the treasurer, the timing of this. It's a bit odd. Usually we deal with these types of things during budget. Why is it, that was approved way back at the beginning of the year? Why is this being recommended now?
It's being, sorry, through you, Mr. Chair, it's being recommended to go forward to 2015 budget for consideration at that time. There's a lot of work in advance of the budget process that we have to prepare and get things kind of set up with Green Shield regardless. Like, it would be a go or no go with Green Shield, but they have to know about the process in advance as being our current providers. Setting up the administrative side of that, and then exactly what type of benefits we'd be looking for. So there's still a lot of legwork to go to that. It will not come back to council now until December for consideration.
Okay, thank you. That clears it up for me. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councillor Durley?
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair. The Green Shield is going to administer this. We know that the coverage for our folks is going to be a set number. Is there a cost to Green Shield for the administrative services that they're providing? And of course, this will come through when we get to the budget number, but I'm just for curiosity at this time to get an understanding.
Yes, through you. Yes, there is a cost. It's about 6% of the amount. It works out to about $2,000 on the total dollar value. And speaking with the organization, the first year will really tell the tale of how it's used and utilized. The consultants that we dealt with indicated that they've never seen it where the fallback to the municipality or the organization didn't cover that. So it's something that I'm investigating further and nailing down that administrative fee. But it is something around close to $2,000, and it's we will know more about whether that's on top of the $28,000 or a part of it at budget time.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Durley. So before calling this, just let me make a couple of comments. First of all, thanks for pursuing this. I know that pursuant to another conversation we had about some benefits, we talked about how, in fact, we can become an employer of choice, a leader without necessarily being a cost leader in all of the various things that we present. And one of the things we talked about, of course, was flex benefits. So thanks for this. Flex benefits gives us the opportunity of, as you pointed out, Madam Treasurer, giving us a great deal of control and predictability with respect to benefit costs. But what it does is gives our employees the opportunity to tailor-make a benefit plan which is of greatest interest and advantage to them. So I'm just wondering, by way of question, whether you've had the opportunity yet to canvass employees with regard to the acceptability of this kind of plan?
Yes, well, not yet, but through this report to council, which we wanted to bring it to council first and make it known here, we will be presenting this for consideration at the all-staff meeting on Wednesday to the staff, so that we can start getting a feedback and have that information available for budget time as well.
I think so. Thank you. I think the value of that is great, because, of course, something like this, being a change, may I guess, have the potential of being misinterpreted, and that would be a shame. Just a quick question, if you don't mind, about the practicalities and the mechanism. As I understand it, this is kind of a straight dollar for dollar application of money out of the fund by the employee. If he has an expense that is $200, it's $200 that comes off of his allowance. This isn't, or at least in the first instance, this isn't a payment toward, in the form of a premium to participate in a larger fund by others. It's strictly an individualized application.
That's correct. The administration of this will be, say, for instance, unlike our dental, it pays up to $1,500, right? But at 50% each payment. This is not restricted under that mechanism. This would be a $500 spending account. So what they'd see on the website, if they go to submit claim, they'd see submit claim under your regular core package or submit claim under your healthcare spending account. And when they go into that claim, Green Shield would make sure that it qualifies as a benefit to us, and it would be, dollar for dollar.
Terrific. Thank you. Other comments or questions? Let me call the question. All in favor? Any opposed? And this is carried. Thank you. Our next item has been moved by Councillor Lane and seconded by Councillor Kersey that the issue summary support, I think it's a report, isn't it? Regarding the Municipal Freedom of Information and Protection of Privacy legislation be received, and that the Policy and Priorities Committee recommend to Council that the solution statement, routine disclosure, and active dissemination be approved. Comments or questions? Mr. Mayor.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Just looking for a little bit of background from the clerk. I know we had something similar at the region, and this is quite a substantive report. Just wondering if we can hear how long this has been in the works and sort of what's prompting it to come forward now.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Who's going to speak to that?
Through you, Mr. Chair, Council had requested, as a result of a former Committee of the Whole report quite some time ago, that we look into a routine disclosure policy so that we could solidify in writing what already occurs at the municipality. This is anticipated to provide a tool to all staff so that we are consistent in the approach of providing information that is permitted without having to go through the formal Freedom of Information process. So it just puts in writing the practice that we have been undertaking for quite some time.
Okay. Thank you very much. Appreciate that.
Other comments or questions? Seeing none, let me call the question. All in favor? And that too is carried. Thank you. Now, I think moving on to old business. It's been moved by Councillor Kersey and seconded by Councillor Lane that the issue summary report regarding a municipal grants policy be received, and that Policy and Priorities Committee recommend to Council that Policy S301-28 Municipal Grants Policy be approved, and that Policy 300-04 Permissive Grants be repealed. Comments, discussion? Councillor Pat.
Sure, I have a couple of quick questions, because I obviously was not here for that meeting. Under key facts, and I think you've explained it, that the organizations must be located in the town of Pelham, but I see here that they must demonstrate evidence, if that's correct, that they're providing that service. Is that, so in other words, I can think of organizations who are not located here, but they could apply, and as long as they show that they're providing a service and a program, is that correct?
Yes, they will have to fill out a measurable outcome
Right,
criteria
right.
sheet.
But they don't have to have a physical office here.
The organizations or volunteer groups would have to be a Pelham-based group, according to this policy.
I'll say it with all prejudice, that's very restrictive, because that would exclude a number of organizations. And secondly, must be paid by the organization in advance. I know many organizations, just in my background, don't have that kind of money up front. So what you're saying is if I apply for $5,000 for a grant for a particular program, I have to be able to demonstrate that I'm going to pay for it first, and then I'll receive the grant? Is that the gist of this?
Yes.
All right, I'm not in favor of that either, but I guess there's, with all due respect, because I know organizations that won't be able to do that simply because they don't have the capitalization, the resources. So And then the interesting thing about the matching, if I may, just quickly, it says, you know, they must be able to match, the grant award will have an upset and must be matched by the organization applying for assistance. Then I flip over to page 29, it says, well, the organization must contribute at least 25%. So which one is it?
It is the 25%.
It's the 25%, so I don't have to be dollar for dollar.
No.
If it's 5,000 and I come up with, I'm trying to make it easier, is understanding it. Okay, so, all right, I'm gonna have some difficulty with it. It's simply, well, one of the things is you're asking organizations to be here located, which restricts, I can think of a half a dozen right now that we've granted that won't be able to apply. Anyhow, I'll leave it at that.
Perhaps, Councillor Papp, you can expand on that a little bit. In moving from the way we were doing things to this new way of handling requests, you've obviously twigged on something that we may not have thought about thoroughly. Perhaps you want to expand on that a little bit. Maybe there are names of organizations or organization types that you have in mind.
Well, sure, I can tell you, but Women's Place, we've given money to. They don't have an organizational office here. I can think of a couple others that do not have, we've given money, they do not have an office here. One of which I'll be in a conflict, but anyhow, it's just, it's obvious, you know, and I don't want to belabor this, it's just that if I was, what I was trying to get at, and I wasn't trying to trap anybody, was that if in fact the organization could demonstrate that they have a clear project for the town of Pelham, whether their office is here, there, and it has a significant community impact, then I would think that they would be considered to be eligible for that. But I'm being respectful, but if you want them physically here, located, knowing some of the organization, that won't happen. It just can't happen. They're just not able to do that.
Mr. CAO, I think you had something that you wanted to.
Maybe you can help me with this, just so I understand.
Just, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think that in the context that you're speaking, you're talking about charities that may be a regional charity or a charity that represents a number of communities, including Pelham and maybe some others. Under this policy, though, we're recommending that charities not be eligible for this type of grant. This is for local groups, local nonprofit, and local service clubs. So the charities that, some of the examples that you've given, are not eligible. They have other means of soliciting funding and grant opportunities through other levels of government. So we wanted to try and narrow that down to specific Pelham groups who are going to make a measurable impact in their activities within the community.
Does that clarify, Councillor Papp?
Well, I respectfully receive that, but I'm opposed to it because, again, charities, the nonprofit organizations that are charitable organizations basically now, who are no longer located in the town of Pelham, would not be able to apply for any type of municipal grant. Is that what I'm hearing?
That's correct. Mr. Chairman.
So, thank you. So just to ask the hypothetical and see what the answer would be, if Women's Place, for example, were asking for support, grant, a donation from the town, how would they go about doing it, or would there simply not be an opportunity for them to make that request, using other means than this policy?
Yeah, well, that's the intent of this policy as the best practice, the research that we've done under the best practices was to take the charities out as what is done in most municipalities with respect to granting organizations and volunteer groups for money that's going to make a difference to the Pelham residents. So our suggestion in talking is that if there's a charity that still wants to come to council, that they come to council independently, because the majority of the grants that we're going to get are only not-for-profit, and it's going to streamline and centralize that whole process, because we have throughout the year a lot of different not-for-profit organization groups or volunteer groups coming for seed money for whatever. This is going to solve that. So if Women's Place, the Welland Hospital had done at one time, they come to council and did a presentation, and then council can make a decision based on that, from that perspective. We really wanted to take charities out of here because the type of funding that's being requested is considerable, and it limits the amount that you can give to other local not-for-profit organizations or volunteer groups. The other thing that came forward in the report and the research we did is that charities are eligible for Trillium grants and other grants that all these not-for-profit groups and volunteer groups are not eligible for. So they have different mechanisms with respect to municipal, federal, and provincial granting that these groups cannot even tap into. most of them can't even afford to do a financial audit on their audit, and that's what's required under the Trillium Grant, for instance. So this gives them that opportunity that they aren't getting elsewhere.
Terrific. That clarifying?
It clarifies, but I'm not satisfied with it because I'm still thinking about, I guess I have to depersonalize it, just thinking about volunteer groups and thinking, I think we're really putting doors around ourselves. I would suggest to these groups, which we've been talking about for years, for them to collaborate with other nonprofit organizations that can bring that kind of funding into play. But however, if it's the will of council to go this way, I can think right now we are going to be, right now when I think about those groups that are in the town itself, so service clubs cannot apply, but they are registered charities. You know that. Rotary is a registered charity. So is Kinsman, so they could not apply. Lions could not apply.
Lions is a charity, is not a charity.
Is Lions not a charity? Well, my familiar with my club, they are a charity and a registered charity. Rotary is that.
Okay.
So I'm clear on what definitions, maybe that's why I'm struggling with what the definitions mean.
What's not-for-profit?
What's not-for-profit, what's volunteer, so maybe that would be helpful so that we're clear on it. So Boy Scouts could apply, Pelham Minor Hockey, is that where we're getting at?
Madam Treasurer?
Yes, those are the types of organizations. With respect to, there's another policy coming, it's the fee subsidy policy that, as part of this report, was suggested it's coming at the next PMP, where the service groups will be able to apply. So that policy will take care of the service groups that are currently getting some funding for reimbursement of expenditures and so forth. So the next policy will take care and tackle all of those types of groups, so.
Thank you, Madam Treasurer. Mr. Mayor, did I,
Councillor Durley was
Councillor
first.
Durley?
And again, I think the question we just answered. This is dealing with one group of people that are looking for money, being nonprofits and volunteer groups only. And I'm expecting now that I've heard that another policy is going to come to deal with the other side of the coin, which was all under our old permissive grants thing, which was just misleading and deceiving. So in fact, now we're looking at, this is dealing with one group. The other policy will deal with another group, and that will answer some of the questions that some of the councilors have put out at, at this meeting, because they're excluded from this, but they will be included with the other. Am I right?
Thank you for that clarification. Mr. Mayor?
Mr. Chair.
I'm confused a little bit about this, and I appreciate the questions from Councillor Papp and the commentary from Councillor Durley as well to clarify it. One thing I'm confused about is the spending limits. It says here that $40,000, but my recollection of the permissive grant existing policy that we've been using for the last or longer is about 26,000. Can we just have some clarity on that?
Madam Treasurer?
Yes, through you, Mr. Chair. The $40,000, I'm just trying to find where it's at. It was supposed to indicate that it's a maximum of $40,000, which includes all of the municipal grant application processes. There is $40,000, 26 of it was through permissive grants. There's about 13,000 through the service clubs, and there's the other stuff, that fees that we're waiving already, the band shell dollars that we're waiving, that totals over the 40,000. It's well over 45,000. So we could take a number right out of this, and it could just say as per budget approval by council. But we wanted to give a number to the committee that they could work with respect to each grant type of application that they're dealing with, so that there is some sort of upset limit, and they're working within that realm.
Okay, thank you. So just to that, so this is 1/3 of kind of a whole package? Is that what the treasurer just sort of said?
Yes, it's about 1/3. This should capture, the fee subsidies policy should capture the other part of the policies, or the types of groups that would be coming forward. The band shell is a volunteer group, as far as we know. So they would be coming forward to this for a certain type of project that they might be doing. But if they're asking for fee subsidy, they'd have to go under the other grant, so that we are aware of all the types of grants that the town is providing to organizations.
Yeah.
Excuse me, if I may, just for clarification, thank you, Mr. Mayor, just give me a second. So when you talk about 1/3 are we talking about 3 policies, of which the one in question is one, the fee subsidies is a second, and there's a third?
No, this is about a third of the funding, this one
I was talking
policy.
I was talking 3 policies, but there's only 2 policies.
policies.
So that one's coming.
That one's
Okay,
coming.
So Mr. Chair, this isn't the complete package, and maybe we should wait until we get the rest of the package before we, and the counselor may want to move, deferral of this until that time. But I guess, Mr. Chair, just reflecting on how we got here, I think we got here because we were concerned that maybe some of the applications coming forward under the permissive grants were for capital. Should they be for capital or should they be for operating? That was our sort of premise. And should they be from maybe organizations that had some surplus funding? So they would come to the town, and then at the end of the year, we'd find out that maybe they had some money in reserves, and it was similar to the amount that was received from the town. So, it's great that we looked at it, but I think this is solving a different problem. This is, in fact, I'm going to say this, I'm not very comfortable with this policy. Historically, we've been supporting the good work of some great charities that provide service in our community. I think we've done that. Women's Place was used as an example in South Niagara, and saying, you know what, that's an issue, and to be a leader in our community, that might be something that we want to ensure that service continues for our community. I don't know that we've been inundated with requests for this type of funding. And if we have, we've sent it somewhere else. And I'm going to say this, Mr. Chair, the Mayor's Gala has funded a lot of this. We've, to the tune of $160,000 over the last 6 years, there's the plug. But I don't know that the municipality needs to do this. I'm just really uncomfortable with how we got here. It might be the best practice and it might work in others, but I'm not sure this is the problem that we're trying to solve. On top of that, we don't have the complete package, so I think maybe we should wait until we see that, what is this thing, this ball of wax that we're trying to deal with? I'm a little bit confused on this, I apologize.
Mr. Mayor, I think our CAO may have some help.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just to respond to some of the comments from council tonight, it wasn't administration's intent to try and exclude any group or create controversy. Our policy was developed around the principles that we had already presented and council had endorsed. So we had said to council that we would recommend, one of the principles of the new policy would be not to include charities. So council endorsed that. We move forward with the drafting of a policy. If council feels that they want charities included, then that's fine too. We are not, we're not here to debate politically. We're just here to follow the will of council. So I might suggest that if council wants charities to be included, that it would be helpful for administration to know that sooner than later so that we could amend the draft. And then I would recommend that the matter be deferred until both sets of policies can come and be held up together, and council can assess them based on that.
Done.
Yep, sounds like a plan. Councillor King, I think you had some questions. I don't know whether they've been
It's
addressed.
okay, I think they've been addressed. Thank you.
Okay, so how do we handle this, Madam Clerk? Do we need a motion to defer?
Need a motion to postpone temporarily until such time as the other policy is presented for consideration.
Sorry, Mr. CEO?
Mr. Chairman, it would be helpful for administration to have some guidance from council. It doesn't need to be a motion, but a direction whether or not to include charities in the policy before we take it back for revision.
So before making a decision with respect to deferral, we want to talk about a motion that Councillor Papp may be willing to make, that we include charities within the scope of the motion that we're talking about.
Mr. Chair, I concur with the CAO, not just the mention of charities, but clearly define what do we mean by nonprofit, volunteer, and charities, because there are parameters that describes these organizations. And secondly, on top of that, I still am struggling with the fact that we're looking at, if we are able to, which I know we can do that, it's just about the locality of this particular entity, because if you open it up just the charities, I mean, basically means that only people that can apply are from the people, those entities that are within the town of Pelham. And essentially, but notwithstanding that, I'm prepared to ask that we include and describe as well as we can, well, not well as we can, because there are very distinct legal definitions of what charities, nonprofits, and volunteer groups are. And I'm pleased, Madam Chair, because that's what I'm trying to figure out, what volunteer groups are. Some people call themselves volunteer groups, when in fact they're incorporated. You know, and you may not know that, but they are. They're a limited corporate, nonprofit corporation, but they don't issue receipts. So this needs to be clearly stipulated, and if you bring that all back, along with what I do like is that whole request about waiving of fees, because I think that's been out everywhere. And if that comes back, I think we would then be much more in a, I can say, viable position to make a decision.
So Councillor Papp, I think where we are is looking at, is it your amendment that we include charities, volunteer groups, and
Define them.
nonprofits? To
Include
define them?
And define them.
Include them and define them as they're
Define them
going to be
as-
used within this.
And also define, if you want to call it, for lack of a better term, the market area, because in fact, as I mentioned before, it will restrict, even if we define it.
So that
will
would be
restrict.
part of the definition.
That will be part of it, and if it comes back that that's what we want to, we can deal with, fine, but at this point, I agree with the mayor, I'm a little uncomfortable with this, I really am. And it's not, and not disrespect to anybody, it's just that it's got to be much more clear, and if trying to, I should say, solve multiple problems, I'm not sure what those problems are, and maybe this will help us articulate and finally put this thing to rest.
I know Councillor Kirsty wanted to.
Oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
Sorry.
But
No, go ahead.
I think, and maybe to borrow a phrase from a previous prime minister, but, you know, charities, what's the phrase? Not necessarily charities, but charities as necessary.
Necessary.
So it may not be, you know, only charities, but by cutting them off, we may not achieve the problem that we're trying to solve. So let's review the problem. Enable and encourage effective citizen involvement in community groups and in civic events related to the self-fulfillment of individuals. That's an interesting problem we're trying to solve. And then the other one, which is I think more in line with the historic permissive grant policy, and to attempt to provide an excellent quality of life in the community. That's, I think, where the former permissive grant piece is. So, again, to pick on a charity, they might, as part of that charity, provide an excellent quality of life in our community by providing a service. And it might be a charity that does that, it might be somebody else that does that. So to exclude a group, I think would not help us solve that problem. And then I think council, when this comes back, we should really think about this piece. Enable and encourage effective citizen involvement in community groups and in civic events related to the self-fulfillment of individuals. That's an interesting
Turn of phrase, yeah.
problem that we're trying to solve. And is that the problem that we want to solve? I don't know. So I'll leave it at that, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Councillor Kersey?
Thank you. I have a number of things that I wanted tweaked in this policy, and I don't know whether you want to have feedback on that before we send it back to staff, or we're going to wait until it comes forward. But with respect to the charity, nonprofit, and all that, I think the charity problem is a separate issue. I think that one of the things that we always struggle with in municipal grants, the municipal grant world, when we look at the dollars that we're spending, are we getting, at least in my mind, are we getting our bang for our buck? You know, we turn down various groups because we don't feel that they're impacting on our community. And yet, when we look at other charities and we give them money, we really don't know how they're impacting on our community. And when the question comes up, it's, well, you know, they're a very good organization, and population-wise, you know, we can assume that 3% of their service comes into Pelham, but we really don't know what impact they actually have had in our community. And I think it's important for us to, you know, as we spend our taxpayers' money, to understand what service is actually coming back or flowing back to Pelham in return for the monies that we're giving charities. We also don't really have an answer to the question of, that our treasurer raised, what access have these charities had to provincial money, federal money, trillium grants, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? Is there indeed a significant financial need within these charities, or is it just a matter of routine that they fire these letters out to all the municipalities and we go, well, we've supported Women's Place for 15 years, and I'm sorry, I'm not picking on that particular group, but so let's throw $3,000 their way. It just seems to me that maybe what we need is a separate policy on how we deal with charities, and that the charities have to also prove that they are providing an impact in our community in return for the dollars that we're giving them, and that there is indeed a financial need, a demonstrated financial need. We're looking at this municipal grant thing, and we're saying it needs to be project-based. There has to be measurable outcomes. Why should we have a lesser expectation of charities? Just for the sake of saying, well. So I think that they're two different worlds. I think this deals with volunteer nonprofit groups, deals with such things as use of our facilities and giving in kind and all of those sort of things rolled up in here. And it's asking for measures, something that we've said we want to see, like what are we getting for our money? So I think there's lots that are positive in this plan. There are some things I'd like to see changed, but I think I'd like to see the charity excluded from this policy, have a separate policy, maybe as part of an overall group of funding policies that we have, but have it stand alone. Because then we have clarity as to what we're dealing with when the requests come forward.
Thank you. Mr. CEO?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would suggest to council, recommend to council that that advice may perhaps be taken and allow us the time to look at the charity issue in isolation and perhaps come back with a charity policy that seems reasonable. So I'd recommend this matter be deferred, and then council or staff return with a non-profit volunteer policy, a in-kind contribution to local groups policy, and a charity policy. Perfect. And then you can look at the three of them together and make an assessment.
Sounds like a plan. Do we need a motion to defer?
Yes, you need a motion to refer back to staff.
Councillor Papp, are you making that motion?
Yes, I am.
Don't need a second. All in favor? No. This discussion is not yet.
Yeah, I think we need to have some further discussion here, because if we're going to send it back, let's send it back. If there are other areas in this policy we don't like, let's tell staff what we want to see. Let's spend a few minutes, and I have a number of things that I'm concerned about, and they don't have to have a motion support them. I just think maybe we need to have a discussion around them.
No, I think that's fair. Go ahead, Councillor.
Okay, so one of the things that concerns me is that we're saying that it has to be project-based and it has to have outcome measures. And we're saying we're not giving you the money until we have all those outcome measures in. To me, I think in some cases that's very difficult to request, because it may be time dependent in order to measure the outcome of it. I think requesting them to have dollars on the table is fair, on a one-for-one basis. And I think for them to specify outcome measures, but I don't think withholding the dollars until all of those measures are brought to the table. We could say that we would request or require a report at the end of the outcome measure project to be brought forward to council, so that we can actually see what has transpired with the money that we've spent, and we've got answers to our constituents on, did we get bang for the buck? So it will help us to measure going forward. So I think to defer payment based on waiting for all the outcome measures is kind of unfair in some cases. I'd also like clarity on whether we're requesting 25% in or 50% in. Dollar for dollar in one part, and then in another part it talks about 25% in.
Madam Treasurer?
It's the section where it says how much you have to donate at least, or have 25% in at least. That's what the recommendation was. That was kind of what we identified in the report that came to council last time, so that they had some sort of skin in the game, as we called it, that they were a little bit more accountable to the project being successful and completed properly. I mean, they could have a higher amount in, and they're only asking for, $2,500, and they've got $2,500 in. It's typical of the type of grants that we deal with regularly through the town, and so that's, but council can adjust that. I mean, they can have $0 in if that's what you feel should be in this policy. So, and with respect to the payment after, it was just so that if we have the measurable outcomes, because, you know, familiar with the, how other grants work, we always had to provide proof of what we've done to date. The service clubs currently, they don't get any funding until they provide us receipts and so forth, so that they show us what they've done. The treasurer reviews it, or the treasurer's office reviews it, and then they get a check cut to them. So we kind of kept that along the same basis.
Well, it seems to me that in one sense, you're talking about money and how they've spent their money. In another, on the other side, you're talking about outcomes. They're different. Like, how you spent the money is one measure, but the bang that you got for the buck is an entirely different measure. So we need to get some clarity around that. What are we looking for?
Well, this policy here is project-based, right? So this is the measurable outcomes one. The fee subsidy policy is more of, you're getting a waiving of fees and so forth. So those ones are, you know, you don't need the outcomes because we know what the outcome is. You've got a facility that you've rented for an event or something like that, and you've asked us to waive the fees for it. So that's that one policy. Under here, we want to know, which I heard from council through the permissive grant policy, is tell me what you did for the town. I want measurable outcomes, something that you can provide proof of, that you've shown us that you've bettered, you know, somebody in the community or some part of the community because of the project that you had and what and how that happened. So that's one of the forms that we had created to show that the committee would evaluate the outcome and say yes, that this was provided. Now, we could do a payment process where you're applying payment to them, you know, so much upfront for startup funds or whatever. That payment can work any way you want to see it. This is, again, how it was presented to council at the last meeting to draft a policy on.
Thank you. Councillor Kersey?
Okay. Well, anyway, I don't want to belabor that point. I just think that there's different ways of measuring outcome, and sometimes they're time dependent and not necessarily easy to crystallize right off the bat, as opposed to building a building and saying, I built the building, here's the bills, and that's the end of it. You know, social outcome is measurable over time. It's not measurable in terms of an instantaneous result in all cases. So I don't want to belabor that, though, Mr. Chair. The other thing, I wondered we talk about a grant award committee. What's the makeup of the grant award committee? Who's going to sit on it? What's the role? Will there be a terms of reference around that?
Yeah, I think the report identifies that we're in the process of developing the terms of reference for that committee, and it will come forward.
Okay.
We'll bring it all encompassing with the other set of grant policies that we're creating. But as, again, in the report that we determined that a citizens committee would be better to determine which grants they felt were to be approved for the community instead of, you know, individual staff or council members. So we haven't determined the makeup yet. We're still discussing how that's going to be brought forward.
Thank you. Councillor?
I just wonder, there seems to be some conflict within the report as well. In one area, I got the understanding, and maybe it's my misunderstanding, that these projects were sort of more capital in nature. And then later on, there's under eligibility, number 8, it talks about the fact that the funding can also be operational. So for example, perhaps they could hire somebody to work within the community with youth, some organization. They have a specific idea that they want to do. That would be more operational as opposed to a capital item.
Right, and this policy was not to limit that it
Okay.
could be either operational or capital in nature, you know, like a sign, if someone wanted to do a sign or something like that. We didn't want to have those restrictions as the old policy had on that.
Okay, so that's the intent of this policy,
Yeah.
is to be as broad as possible, both operationally and capital.
Operationally, as a project base, though, what we wanted to make clear is if you know, you're showing significant surplus funds and then you're asking for dollars, it could be rejected.
Thank you.
And lastly, Mr. Chair, number 4 under financial criteria, it speaks to where an organization could get a grant and then they would not be eligible for a grant for an additional 2 years. And I don't know that that's something that we want either. You know, if a group is doing good work and they have an ongoing project, or they have an additional project that came out of the first project, do we want to just say to them, no, you won't even be considered for 2 more years?
Madam Treasurer?
Yeah, that was, you know, again, through the best practices, actually, the term was longer, that other municipalities are not allowing the grants to come back, so that it gives other organizations an opportunity. But that number can be changed. It's just that if someone got a grant this year, and then they come back again next year, and then you've got a myriad of others coming, you know, at least it gives you some flexibility to say, you know, you just received a grant, and this is why you're not gonna get the grant this year. But, I mean, it's at council's discretion as well.
Thank you. Councillor?
I'm good, I'm done.
Okay. I'm
Taken enough.
confident that notes were taken with respect to all of those. Okay. So what we want to do is to pass on the deferral. Let me just say that I think when we saw this in the first instance, we were pretty impressed, and I think remained pretty impressed with the procedural aspects of it and the improvements that that we could see to the process as we were using it before. I think these details are coming out at us now as a result of reading this more closely and seeing how it works. And I think this is all to the good of the development of that program. It does rather sound like there's a suite of 3 policies that we want to see together. So we're going to defer this until we're ready to bring those back. Any further discussion with respect to the deferral? All in favor? That is deferred. What do I do here?
So you refer it back to staff and sign it.
Spent 4 decades in this, and surrounded by.
Thank you. Now moving into regular policy review. It has been moved by Councillor Papp and seconded by Councillor Kersey that the issue summary report regarding the driveway culvert installation and replacement policy be received, and that Policy and Priorities Committee recommend to Council that policy S701-07 driveway culvert installation replacement policy be approved. Questions, comments?
Mr. Chair.
Mr. Mayor.
I was intrigued by number 4 under key facts. This is about the culvert ends by vehicles driving off the edge, that this damage will be repaired by the town at expense of the owner. Is that what we already do? Or is that new? Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Mennel.
We don't do it at this time, however, it shouldn't be a problem any longer, since there's also specifications as to culvert size and length. The culverts are, like in the past, a resident or an owner would come in, they'd purchase a culvert that might be a little bit smaller than what was actually needed, and they would drive off the edge. Now there's specifications that identify the width of a culvert based on the platform width of the driveway, so that it really shouldn't be that much of a problem. But that is what we're proposing as part of this, because that does affect the drainage of the roadside ditches with the culverts crushed down.
Thank you, Mr. Mennel. Mr. Mayor?
Thank you. I was also, and again, maybe it is here and I just didn't see it. That happened earlier and I apologize. But just about the number of culverts that somebody can have? Is that in here? I don't know, how's that handled? Somebody says, you know what, I want a driveway here, and I want a circle driveway, and then I can, all those things. How does that work?
Mr. Mennel?
It's the building department deals with that. There's I think it's in the bylaw. It describes how many entrances you can have based on frontage.
Okay.
I think for the most part, though, if it's a rural type environment, there really isn't that much of a limit. If you're a farmer, and I know we've put in numerous culverts in the south end of town for driveway entrances, simply because the farmer wanted to access his fields at different locations.
Right, okay. And then that we charge for the first culvert, but after that, it's ours to care of in perpetuity. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay, thank you.
Other comments, questions? Councillor Lane?
Yes, thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair. To the director, what is the current material that we use for culverts? Are there one specific type, or I noticed that there looks like the rubber culvert going in some places, and then in some places, do we use a different type of culvert?
Mr. Mennel?
Currently, we use high-density polyethylene, again, a plastic-style culvert. It's easy to work with, it's flexible, it's light, it's has couplings that are suitable, like it's not an issue of trying to fight with a culvert to try and bind the different ends together. It's the standard that we now use.
Thank you. Councillor Lane? Are you good?
If I might just
By
follow,
all
up,
means.
is that throughout the town, at whatever size we use it?
Not necessarily, not for every size.
Okay.
It's, if it's a larger culvert, again, it becomes impractical, and they don't, the plastic or high-density polyethylene doesn't have the strength to carry the loads over top of it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Other comments or questions? I had one. With respect to item 3, the warranty will not extend to rutting, settlements, or potholes in the surface of the driveway above or adjacent to the culvert within the road allowance. Mr. Mannell, I take it you were looking to the homeowner to repair those on his own?
That is correct. Currently, if it was, say, a driveway entrance, an asphalt entrance, and it just simply wore out after 10 or 15 years, its lifespan, that would not be the responsibility of the municipality to repair it. Same as if the owner has simply put a stone covering down for the driveway, or left the original covering that the town has placed there, and it ruts over time just from turning motions coming in. That's up to the owner to apply a little extra stone or rake out the rutting.
Thank you. Are we ready to call the question? All in favor? And that is passed. It's been moved by Councillor Lane and seconded by Councillor Kersey that Policy and Priorities Committee received the issue summary report regarding drainage systems inspection programs and update drainage systems inspection programs update for information. Mr. Mannell?
Yes, this report, it just provides an update to council with respect to various drainage systems that related to storm water management in the town, and how public works staff react to maintaining them and inspecting them on a regular basis. Again, some require more in-depth inspections, others a lot less hands-on, so to speak. They're done on a more or less when we're working in that area as part of a rehabilitation of a road or what have you, then they're dealt with. Some, such as storm sewer systems, don't require a lot of maintenance simply because the silts that would typically get into them are caught in the sump of the adjacent catch basin systems, and the catch basins are maintained on an annual basis each spring.
Thank you. Questions, comments? Councillor Pat.
Through you, Mr. Chair, to Mr. Mannell. So, just so I'm clear, for example, the area that's on the Steve Bauer Trail that's in behind Edward Avenue where we worked last year, how is that a roadside ditch? Is that what they call that, or would that, you know the area I'm talking about, Alan?
Yeah.
Is that considered a roadside ditch, or what's that?
Well, it's not so much a ditch as it's a storm outlet.
It's a storm outlet.
It outlets the, there's an outfall
Right.
right at the back of near the
Right.
park there. It outfalls to the channel, which then outfalls to the detention pond on Beckett Crescent.
Right.
So it was cleaned out last year,
Right.
and now it's included as part of the regular maintenance with respect to mowing, keeping the weeds cut down. I think we have half a dozen cuts of the grass along that thing each year identified.
Okay, I'm clear on that. I was trying to figure out how you would define that area. Okay, that's fine. Thank you.
Other questions or comments? Mr. Mayor?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I guess I got confused between storm sewers and catch basins. So I just want to reiterate, we do look at the municipal drains every 5 years. That's good to know. The detention ponds how often are those, it says once every 2 years by town staff? Can we just hear more about that? What does that inspection look like?
Mr. Mennel?
Like that one on Beckett
That's what
there?
I'm thinking.
Because it was, well, I'll just put it this way, Mr. Chair. It seemed to me when residents were asking about it, and I know they asked the councilors and other members of council, myself, they said it hadn't been cleaned in X years. So we inspect it every 2 years. How does that work?
Well, we do the inspection to identify the work plan for the site. I know with the Beckett Crescent one, since I did the inspections on it, again, I think we identified the items that we look at, upstream channels, which would be, as Councillor Papp identified, we look at those to see is there an issue, erosion, slumping of the sides into the bottom. We look at the outfall, we look at the dam, the spillways, the low flow channel is a key indicator of how the pond is performing. With the Beckett Crescent one, even though it was overgrown with brush throughout the bottom, the low flow channel still existed as it was easily identifiable once you walk down the bottom of the pond. Like having done the inspections, I know that it was there, and once the brush was cleared away, you could see it. We've done no maintenance on that pond bottom other than to cut the brush away. So it was there. The pond functioned as it should. We're looking for things that maybe a failure of the dam at the downstream side. Again, cracks in it, settling, that sort of thing, because they're largely just earthen structures is all they are with a concrete outfall.
Thank you. So the detention ponds, so we only do the work on it based on the inspection. So in that case, again, just as an example, people said that it hadn't been cleaned out in X years. So your recommendation was that it was fine, and so we didn't need to clean that out. How does that work? Is that the best practice that we do, or is it sort of, every 10 years, whether it needs it or not, sort of thing that you go and clean these out?
Mr. Mennel?
If there's, again, that's part of why we do the inspection, to see if there is work required. And the work may be something as simple as clean some silt from the outlet structure. Like the outlet structures typically will gather up some silt. In this case, that one was performing fine. There was really no action required to it. And most of them are in that same state. They're typically at the low point of the storm sewer system, and which is usually the wettest spot. You really can't maintain the bottoms of them. A lot of them are identified as dry ponds, where water does not sit. There's simply a low flow channel. But dry pond is just simply a name. It's extremely wet down there. It's more swampy than anything else. They're allowed to overgrow, just simply because you can't do it mechanically with respect to cutting that grass or cutting the trees down. So it's all handwork. And having seen what we did on Beckett and how much nicer it looks on Beckett, we're going to start identifying others of these stormwater detention ponds that have become overgrown. Maybe not to that extent, but at least clean the dams off and the outfall structures, that sort of thing.
Okay, well, that's good to hear, and I'm sure residents will appreciate that. In terms of the storm sewers, it says here that there's no formal inspection program for storm sewer system unless they're scheduled for resurfacing and reconstruction. Is that sort of standard across municipalities?
Yes, I've never heard of a storm sewer inspection program. It's not to say that some municipalities don't do it, but I know that I've not heard of it. We do it, as I said in the report, if we've identified a road reconstruction where there's an existing storm sewer, we'll inspect it just to ensure that it's suitable for what its needs are. But as I mentioned, with the catch basin cleaning, there's usually not a lot of sand in the storm sewer system.
Okay, thank you. The culverts that are talked about, these are not the driveway culverts that we were talking about? These are the larger over-the-road culverts, is that correct, under number 6?
Yes, that's correct. There's several different types of culverts. You have your large structures, which are part of the bridge inspection program. They're regulated by the province. There's provincial legislation identified to inspect them every other year. The other culverts are inspected as we rehabilitate a road. If we're resurfacing a road, then the intent is to have a look inside to see if that needs to be replaced at that time, rather than waiting until we have the road resurfaced, then coming back afterwards and digging the road back up one more time. In most cases, you really can't tell a lot of the condition of the culvert in the bottom, because it's usually covered with some silt or water at the time. So it could be rusted out. It could be working fine. A lot of these culverts, the larger diameter ones, date back 40 years possibly, when the town first started doing drainage improvements on the rural road system. And they're getting to the end of their lifespans, and it just takes rains like we had recently, which will wash away the silt and wash beneath the culvert and cause that erosion, which will lead to the failures that we've had.
Okay, thank you. That's it for now. I might have another question later on, but I know Councillor Durley is anxious to.
Thank you, Councillor Durley.
Not anxious, just the issue of roadside ditches, Mr. Chairman, has come up several times, and I brought this to staff's attention. And when a roadside ditch is cleaned, quite often it's cleaned too deeply, and people who live in areas where ditches were clean complain that there's 2 or 3 inches of water that sits there all the time because the bottom of the roadside ditch, which was clean, is lower than the culvert, which takes water away. Now, I know roadside ditches aren't meant as municipal drains. However, there is a nuisance factor that some people complain about, that there is water sitting in front of their homes. What can be done if in fact this situation exists? I know it's better to have the ditch clean than not to have it clean, but you know, when it gets cleaned too well, the water sits there. And what can we do about that?
Thank you, Councillor Durley. Mr. Meno?
The intent is not to leave water sitting in the bottom of the ditch. In some cases, it could simply be some silt in the adjacent driveway culvert that may be holding that water back. In some cases, again, it's not an exact science. The fellow on the excavator is simply cleaning silt out of the bottom, and from time to time he may excavate a little bit too much, more than what he should, leaving that water that you've identified as ponding in there. I don't think it's a widespread issue. In some cases, such as the south end of town, there's a lack of elevation difference from high points to low points, and it's extremely difficult to get a lot of that water moving along. It just any little obstruction will slow it and leave it ponding in the bottom of a ditch. It's not the intent.
Thank you, Councillor Durley.
When it does happen, you know, is there a course of action that should be taken through you, Mr. Chair?
We can return to the site if it's a huge issue.
Okay. So if we get calls about that, we can ask them to call you, or we can
course.
forward their concerns to you. Okay, thank you.
Other comments, questions? Mr. Mayor, did you?
Yeah, just maybe a general question. So these are the standard operating guidelines, I guess, that we've been following for a number of years. Is that correct? Like, how long have we been? We inspect this at this time. We inspect this at this time. We do this ditch at this time. These aren't, I'll say, new. How old are they? How long have we been doing it this way?
Mr. Meno?
I really can't comment. I know how long I've been doing them, but
How long have you been doing them this way?
27 years.
27 years.
So, but they seem to be practices that work well. The stormwater detention pond inspections, that seem to be a suitable amount. We tried doing it at once every year in the past, and it really didn't really make a lot of difference. Once every year, once every other year. Catch basin cleaning, again, it's an annual process simply because of the amount of grit and debris that gets deposited on the roads, whether it's winter maintenance type activities that all end up in there, but that usually follows the sweeper. The sweeper goes through, sweeps the street, whatever he doesn't pick up ends up in the catch basins. The catch basin cleaner comes along, cleans out the catch basins. Storm sewers have not really been much of a problem. So again, not something that we pay a lot of attention to, other than during road rehabilitation type programs, resurfacing, what have you, that sort of thing. The ditches.
So, Mr.
Mr.
Chair,
Mayor?
just to cut off Mr. Mantle, and he's maybe replowing the same field again. I guess my real question I want to ask is, if we were to say, if council was able to say, you know what, maybe we should, because of the session that we went to at FCM that says the water, is an issue, is becoming more of an issue across the country. If we were to say, you know what, ramp it up, turn it up a little, do a little more, and come back to us with a price on that, what would be the low-hanging fruit that you would do? Would you add more ditching? Would you, you know, whatever, inspect the culverts a little more often. Can we hear just a little bit of more? If we said, turn it up, make it a little bit better, what would that look like compared to what we have?
Mr. Mennel?
I think you would inspect the smaller diameter culverts, the cross culverts, on a more regular basis. You would identify flushing of driveway culverts, that sort of thing. Right now, there's such a, if the silt gets in the driveway culvert, well, you know, that's going to leave 5 to 10 centimeters of water laying down upstream of that culvert. So those are the kind of things that you could do. Probably additional ditching. If there was additional funding, we'd do additional ditching, cleaning out the debris. As I think we mentioned in the past, there's less farming type activities going on in those rural areas. Farmers don't see the, or the owners don't see the need for maintaining the roadside ditches, whether it be cutting the weeds or the grass. It's left to the municipality to do that, and we don't always catch everything that's that the owner would see, you know, by being there on a regular basis. So additional ditching, which you know, it might provide some minor additional benefit by removing more vegetation and some of the silt, but again, it's one of those things you have to kind of start working at, and you see if there's a real need to it. But I think the current ditching program deals with a lot of those issues. We can see where the issues are, and we maintain the ditches to ensure that the water's not ponding. Usually you can see where the cattails are, and that'll be the issue.
So,
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, maybe to that, I wonder if maybe we should, I don't know if it's too late for this year, but we should look at that, something like that, and say, what is the price to do that? And it's obviously a budget item. If we were to say, you know what, just turn it up a little bit and move on to those next things, let's look at the cross culverts and the driveway culverts and the ditching. Some of that might be solved. You might pick off some low-hanging fruit on the driveway culverts pretty quick, and then after that it might be clear. But I don't know if we can direct how we might word that. Maybe the CAO can help, but how might we you know, increase
Back it up a little bit, yeah.
Increase the
Mr. CAO.
level of service to the areas to help deal with the water.
I think that, Mr. Chairman, one of the things that we could do to provide additional service would perhaps be perhaps we should do some sort of an over-year needs assessment and get some recommendations on areas to focus on as opposed to general programs. You know, it's one thing to say we need additional ditching, but where's the priority? I mean, I don't know if we know that. So it may be of some use to get some outside assistance to help us focus in on that type of thing and then develop a specific program. I'm not sure.
Thank you, Mr. CEO. If I just might interject at this point, we did ask for a report to be done on the flow of water across the town, and I think we heard in our last meeting that the project was defined as taking 20% of it every year for 5 years and getting a report and understanding where the issues are with respect to water flow. Perhaps, Mr. Mannell, you can give us maybe an update on where that is. Where are we, and would it in fact catch the sort of thing that we're talking about
Certainly,
now?
that is the intent of this program. It will identify the need for additional municipal drains, if required. It will then lead on to which ditches we can lower the outlets. Now, once we have a municipal drain that'll take that water from those roadside ditches, and that will allow us to alter those elevations, provide better flow characteristics in the ditches. So, you know, that it will be a benefit by providing that sort of direction for us.
Thank you, and presumably the expert who's looking at this will also be able to say you have some problems in some areas because our maintenance program isn't adequate given the conditions that we have now. That could also be picked up where that in fact is true,
I'm certain,
if it is.
yes.
And so some of the changes might be operational as opposed to necessarily capital.
Of course.
Yeah. And where is that program in progress now? What stage are we at?
We are preparing the request for proposal at this time. And that will be, it will go out and we'll receive the prices based on the terms of reference for that project.
Right, and are you preparing the terms of reference with respect to just the first fifth of that, or the whole,
Just one component at a time.
one component at a time?
Yes, pick one watershed area and deal with that.
Is there any sense to considering the whole project? You may divide it up into pieces, but at least get a sense of what the whole piece could look like.
I think you need to identify one single watershed area, like you can, like we budgeted to do one watershed area if you want to do, or 20% of the drainage area in the south end primarily. If you want to do more, then it'll obviously cost more.
Right. I was thinking at this stage from a planning perspective as opposed to actually doing it, just planning the work, understanding what the scope of the work is going to be over the full 5 years. But maybe we have that.
Well, that's what the municipal drain system, the way it's broken up, is in, like, and that's how we plan to set up the terms of reference, examine the watershed area for each municipal drain.
Okay. I had just a couple of other questions. I think you've answered a couple of them in the course of the discussion, but I had one other. I don't know whether we have considered or whether we're aware of the existence of drainage committees in other municipalities. Are you familiar with those?
I'm not.
You're not?
Superintendent, maybe.
Perhaps we can ask that you maybe look at the question of drainage committees. I understand that the major benefit of a drainage committee is that we have people in the town who are able to identify pretty quickly and accurately what immediate issues might be that could be tackled. I'm given to understand that the town of Wainfleet has one that's working very well, but I don't know. Could we take a look at that and maybe hear from you, maybe just write us all a report with respect to whether that might be a useful mechanism? It might not be, but I think I'd like to know, certainly.
We can ask the drainage superintendent to report on that also.
That would be great. Thank you. Any other questions or comments with regard to this? So to call the question, to receive the report, I'm sorry?
I think, I just wondered if the CAO wanted to give us an update. He and I had a conversation before committee. It's slightly related, I'll say, so.
Mr. CEO,
Yeah,
please.
thank you, Mr. Chairman. There has been some concerns with regards to the question that has been revolving around tonight has been the level of service we offer. And in light of the recent damages that the municipal roads have sustained with the abnormal rain amounts, we've had substantial damage on Sulphur Springs, as you're aware, and substantial damage on Effingham, which is going to require immediate repair. That work has to be done, although that work is now not currently budgeted. And we had some discussion about how or where we could find money in the existing capital budget in order to pay for this new work. I didn't feel comfortable making an arbitrary decision on where that money should come from. I felt it was in the interest of council to have give direction on that. So we have those two roads that require repair at an expense, I understand, currently of around $40,000, although we have not, I don't believe, priced anything out yet. We're now starting to see some concern, I think some considerable concern in the culvert budget, culvert replacement, because we've had an extraordinary amount of that. And even as of up to today, we're still seeing this intense short weather that is having an impact. By all accounts, speaking with the director, who's been obviously a long-serving member of the community, to the field staff, the common response is that we've never seen anything like this before. So what I might do is make a recommendation to council that they consider the postponing, not canceling, the postponing of 2 road projects this year in order to establish a budget so that these repairs on culvert or the overages on culverts and the repairs on the roads that have to be done can proceed. And then if there are other needs for capital that we would come back to council. Council has, in order to reallocate capital funding, we have to have council approval. So if there's other things that happen throughout the course of now and the end of the year, i.e. if this is the type of summer we're gonna have, what type of winter are we going to have? We don't know, and there's a lot of unknowns, and I'm, to be frank, a little nervous. What I would recommend to council is that they consider postponing the Highland Road project. That goes from Elizabeth to Cambro. The value of that road project is $139,235. Second of all, I would recommend the road project on Effingham between Metler and, it's on Metler, the Effingham Road, Metler 560 meters, be deferred as well. That has a project value of $117,468 for a total of $256,703. That would allow us to move immediately to repair the roads that we currently have. It would also give us a capital contingency fund that if we required additional work to be done, like we are anticipating now, that we would come back to council and there would be some capital dollars available. If those capital dollars from these two projects are not used, they would be carried over into the 2015 budget.
I just want us to handle that procedurally.
I would call for a motion.
Before we finish off the motion that's on the table now,
You could, yeah.
excuse me, just coming to learn the procedural part of this thing. Bear with us.
You could deal with this one and introduce that as a new motion, or you could amend this motion. It's probably more appropriate to deal with this one and introduce that as a new motion.
I'm going to take Madam Clerk's advice with respect to this and call the question with respect to the motion that's in front of us with regard to the drainage report. All in favor of receiving that? Thank you. And to deal with Mr. CAO's suggestion, I think we need a motion to put that on the floor. Councillor Papp. We don't require a seconder, so let's have some discussion.
Just a question on the Highland. I brought my budget book. On the Highland, there's also sewer and water works. So it's, what happens in that case, and why is staff not recommending just like one of the urban road resurfacing projects that doesn't have the water and sewer?
Mr. CEO.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My understanding is those projects have already been awarded. Therefore, it would be difficult to rescind the contracts that have already been signed.
All right, thank you. So then the water and wastewater budgets would be postponed as well? They just sit in the reserve, is that correct?
I believe that's correct, Mr. Chairman, yes.
All right,
Thank you, Mr. CEO. Other questions? Discussion?
And so this will come back to us. The staff will report on, we're sort of approving as part of this, a budget upset limit of 40,000, is that correct? And then any other future spending in this area will come back to us, and I presume we'll get a report on how we allocated that 40,000.
I think if I remember correctly, Councillor Papp's motion was that we receive a report with respect to this so that we can, with a recommendation.
Or
Mr. Chairman, if I may.
forthwith? You want to do it now?
Well, I think if I hear what the mayor is asking for, it's a project conclusion summary report. So, in other words, once the repairs at Sulphur have been done, the director will come back with a report outlining the repairs have been completed, here's the outcomes, etc. And that, yes, council would be approving a $40,000 upset limit for these two specific road projects to be corrected. And that if there was additional capital requirements for other repairs or other results of this type of experience, that we would come back and ask for reallocation of that money. Otherwise, that money would be held and turned over into or rolled over into the 2015 budget.
Thank you. So,
Thank you.
So with respect to $40,000 upset limit now, and to hold the money that's currently allocated to two other projects in reserve, pending the potential of those.
In essence, that's correct, Mr. Chairman. Not necessarily reserve, but there was, those projects, the money doesn't disappear.
No.
If we need additional money for additional repairs, we'll come back and ask. If we don't, then the outstanding dollars that we haven't used would be then carried over into 2015 to
Right.
complete these projects.
Right.
Just a
Councilor Durley.
procedural thing, we're reallocating budgeted funds, can this committee do that, or do we need a movement for council to have done that? Because we're not getting a seconder here, so I'm thinking that council needs to give this direction and committee can't. Just a clarification on process.
Thank you. Madam Clerk, can you, or Mr. CEO?
I think that as far as, we can come back, what I'm looking for tonight is if that is an acceptable way of finding the dollars needed now and potentially into the future. If I have that direction, then I will obviously instruct staff not to proceed with these two projects as far as tendering them. It may not be a bad idea to come back to regular council on the 7th for a formal motion, but if I have the direction tonight to proceed with this as a solution, that's what I'm trying to accomplish this evening.
Okay, my thought was, Mr. Chair, the emergency condition is something that needs to go forthwith type of thing, and I was looking at how quickly we could do it, but, certainly if that procedure will do it, then that's great, but I believe procedurally we need to have a motion from council, right?
Thank you.
Yeah, that's a good point, Mr. Chairman. We have to fix the roads no matter what, so we're gonna go fix them. It's how we pay for that with unbudgeted dollars, so that's the piece that council needs to. I need to know that the other impacts on the capital budget council's comfortable with, rather than staff making an arbitrary decision to say, for example, we'll cut the ditching budget down by 40,000 this year to pay for the road repairs, and then all of a sudden there's significant controversy in the public that comes back to council for a decision that administration has made. I'm trying to avoid that situation.
Questions? Comments?
I'd like to keep things as simple as possible. So you're asking and requesting that we give you direction to proceed with the repairs in the tentative amount of 40,000 right away. And secondly, at July 7th, we will then deal with the deferral of A, B, C capital projects as identified for consideration for other ongoing possible pending repairs to roads. Is that basically it?
As I understand it.
Yeah, okay, that's clear.
Questions, comments?
That
Clear for
covers,
everyone?
Councilor Durley, that we'll deal with it, right, John, at July 7th, that, because it is a approved budget, but right now, we're gonna repair what we have to repair, because we have to do it. Is that,
That's where I was going, yeah.
okay, good. Okay, I'm clear,
Any further discussion?
As much.
as usual.
Thank you, Mr. CEO. Shall we call that question? All in favor? And that is carried. And that brings us, I think, to the end of the meeting. It has been moved by Councillor Durley and seconded by Councillor King that this regular meeting of Policy and Priorities Committee be adjourned until the next regular committee scheduled for Monday, July 7th, 2014, unless sooner called by the mayor. Discussion? All in favor? Thank you. Meeting is adjourned. For your help. Thank you, John.
Savings are-
Yeah.
Yeah.